I stood at the altar in my custom gown, listening to my groom proudly announce he was giving his mother our entire future plus $6,000 a month. They smirked, expecting an obedient bride to swallow her tears in front of 400 elite guests. They were dead wrong. I was the only one holding the key to crush the empire they had just stolen. Smiling, I snatched the microphone. Their absolute ruin had officially begun. Hello to our wonderful listeners of Zoe Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to survive and keep creating these stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. My name is Alyssa Delgado, and this is my story. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Austin estate was thick-heavy with the suffocating scent of thousands of imported white orchids and the unspoken judgment of Texas high society. The crystal chandeliers suspended above us cast a flawless golden glow over 400 of the city's wealthiest elites. Everything was meticulously curated to project the perfect image of a billionaire tech founder marrying his beautiful bride. But beneath the glittering surface, the reality was entirely cold. We were standing right next to a towering 7-tier fondant cake ready for the traditional cutting ceremony. That was when Brandon Vance, the man I was moments away from calling my husband, signaled the live orchestra to stop playing. He grabbed the microphone with a wide, arrogant smile. I thought he was going to deliver a heartfelt toast, or perhaps thank our guests for traveling from all over the country. Instead, his voice boomed across the silent room, proud and boasting, announcing that just days ago he had finalized the legal paperwork to transfer 100% of his premarital assets into his mother's name. Before the shock could even register in my brain, he added the final nail to the coffin. He cheerfully declared that moving forward, he would be automatically deducting $6,000 every single month from our joint marital account. This money, he explained to the crowd, was simply a humble allowance to repay his mother for all her sacrifices. Down at the VIP table, Evelyn, my future mother-in-law, put on a masterclass performance. She pressed a delicate lace handkerchief to her eyes, feigning tears of overwhelming gratitude. She perfectly played the role of the devoted, exhausted single mother who had given up her life for her son, now finally reaping the rewards of her hardship. Right on cue, the entire groom's side of the family erupted into a deafening roar of applause. They stood up, clapping and cheering for his remarkable display of filial piety. I stood frozen on the elevated stage. The heavy silk and tulle of my custom-designed wedding gown suddenly felt like a straitjacket pulling me down. Premarital assets. Those 3 words echoed repeatedly in my mind until the devastating truth finally clicked. He was not talking about his vintage cars or his luxury condo. He was talking about OmniStream Dynamics. The tech company that everyone praised him for was built entirely on my sweat and tears. I had spent nearly 400 sleepless nights fueled by black coffee sitting in a cramped apartment writing every single line of the secret source code. Because of my restrictive international visa status 2 years ago, I could not legally register the corporation in my own name. I trusted Brandon completely. I put everything under his name, believing we were building our shared future. Now I realized he had just legally handed over my intellectual property, my absolute life's work, to Evelyn. They looked at me with smug satisfaction. Brandon and Evelyn fully expected me to lower my head, swallow my pride, and cry silently. They assumed I would play the part of the obedient, submissive bride just to avoid causing a humiliating scene in front of 400 incredibly powerful people. They miscalculated entirely. Instead of bursting into tears, a genuine loud laugh escaped my lips. It started as a soft chuckle and quickly escalated into a sharp, mocking sound that sliced right through the fading applause. The entire room went dead silent. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and snatched the microphone right out of Brandon's hand. I looked directly into his panicked eyes, my voice ringing out calm, steady, and loud enough for every single person to hear. The wedding is canceled. I wish you and your mother a lifetime of happiness with that empty shell. A collective gasp ripped through the massive ballroom. 400 guests stared in absolute unblinking shock. The perfect illusion was instantly shattered. Brandon's charming, flawless groom persona vanished into thin air. His face twisted into an ugly dark shade of red. Furious, he grabbed the backup microphone from the DJ stand and completely lost control. He screamed into the mic, calling me a gold digger. He shouted that I was ungrateful, that I was a nobody he tried to save, and that I had absolutely zero respect for my elders. His vicious insults bounced off the marble walls, revealing his true pathetic nature to everyone present. I did not scream back. I simply reached for my left hand and pulled off the massive 3-carat diamond ring. With a swift, forceful motion, I threw it straight into his chest. It bounced off his expensive tuxedo and clattered loudly onto the polished floor. I gathered the heavy layers of my wedding dress, turned my back on him, and walked steadily down the aisle. Every step I took felt like shedding a layer of toxic skin. The confused murmurs of venture capitalists, socialites, and tech journalists blended into a chaotic symphony. I did not rush. I kept my posture completely straight, my chin held high, making eye contact with no one but the grand exit doors at the end of the hall. The crisp evening air of Texas was waiting for me outside, and I left them behind, turning their extravagant $1 million celebration into the most humiliating joke in all of Austin. The sunrise after the wedding did not bring warmth. It brought a cold clarity that sharpened my senses. I did not waste a single minute on mourning. By 9 a.m, I had already cleared every personal item from the high-rise apartment that I once called home. Brandon's clothes, his expensive watches, the remnants of a life built on lies, I left it all behind like refuse. I blocked his number, his email, and his social media profiles on every device I owned. He no longer existed in my world. By noon, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Austin, across from the most formidable intellectual property attorneys in Texas. I did not want a divorce lawyer. I wanted a scalpel that could cut through corporate fraud. The investigation was swift and devastating. My legal team tore through the digital trail Brandon had carelessly left behind. We discovered that the betrayal was not a spontaneous decision born of a wedding day whim. 3 months ago, in a quiet office across state lines, Brandon and Evelyn had filed incorporation papers for an obscure limited liability company. It was a shell company, a parasitic entity designed specifically to strip OmniStream Dynamics of its assets. Piece by piece, they had been siphoning the legal ownership of my software code, transferring the rights directly to Evelyn. They had not just stolen my labor, they had planned the heist with surgical precision while I was asleep in our bed. 2 days later, there was a sharp, demanding knock at the door of my temporary residence. I checked the peephole to see Evelyn standing there. Gone was the lace handkerchief, gone were the trembling hands and the fake tears of a doting mother. She looked at me with eyes as sharp and cold as a razor blade. She did not wait for an invitation. She stepped inside, smelling of expensive perfume and calculated malice. She placed a single envelope on my coffee table with a thud that echoed in the quiet room. $50,000, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. This is more than you are worth, Alyssa. Sign the release forms, renounce all claims to the company, and walk away. Consider it a severance package for your little hobby. I stared at the check, then back at her. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply let her arrogance breathe. Under the table, my hand pressed the record button on my phone, which was already hidden and running. I built that company, Evelyn, I said, keeping my tone purposefully flat. I wrote the code. I filed the architecture. You did not just steal a company, you stole a person's life work. Evelyn scoffed, leaning in until her face was inches from mine. She dropped the mask completely. You were nothing but a pawn. A temporary tool for my son to exploit until he did not need you anymore. Do not be naive, girl. You are in Texas, and you are up against a woman with influence and a son with a platform. Do not even think about taking this to court. You will lose, you will be bankrupt, and you will be labeled a pathetic fraud before you even walk through the courthouse doors." She left the envelope on the table and walked out confident that her intimidation had worked. She had no idea she had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle I needed to destroy her. That night my phone buzzed with an unknown number. It was a burner line, but I knew who it was the moment I answered. Brandon's voice was shaky, wet with tears, and pathetic. He claimed that Evelyn had forced him to sign the papers, that he was a victim of her control, and that he was desperately trying to fix the mess. It was the same script he had used every time he messed up during our relationship. "Alyssa, please," he sobbed. "The system is crashing. I do not know how to maintain the back end. If you give me the master decryption key for the last module, I can save the company. I can fix everything. Just send me the code." The audacity of the man was breathtaking. Even while he was busy looting my life work, he still expected me to provide the technical support to keep his stolen empire afloat. Hearing him beg while simultaneously demanding my intellectual property crystallized my resolve. I felt nothing for him, no anger, no sadness, just a clinical, detached sense of purpose. I realized then that suing them now would be too quick, too clean, and frankly far too generous. A standard lawsuit would only result in a settlement, a payout, and a quiet exit for them. That was not justice. I did not want them to settle. I wanted them to experience the true cost of their greed. I would not stop them from launching. I would not warn the investors. I would let them climb as high as they could, believing they were untouchable geniuses, and then at the very peak of their success, I would cut the safety line. I would let them fall, and I would make sure there was no one there to catch them. Evelyn did not take my rejection lightly. When her $50,000 check failed to buy my silence, she immediately weaponized her vast connections. Within 48 hours of her walking out of my temporary apartment, the coordinated smear campaign began. She funneled an undisclosed massive amount of cash into the hands of local Texas media outlets and prominent tech gossip blogs. The headlines they published read like cheap tabloid fiction, but in the relentless echo chamber of the internet, fiction quickly transforms into undeniable fact. They officially branded me a romance scammer. The heavily sponsored articles painted a grotesque picture of a manipulative opportunist who had specifically targeted a brilliant, wealthy founder just to leech off his genius. They falsely claimed I was attempting to steal his proprietary technology and drain his personal bank accounts after staging a dramatic, calculated exit at our wedding. Then came Brandon's sickening performance. He took to social media, going live to an audience of over 100,000 viewers. I watched the broadcast from the cold, harsh glow of my laptop screen in the dark. He sat in his dimly lit office wearing a plain gray sweater to look intentionally humble and approachable. His eyes were perfectly swollen and red, his voice cracking with just the right amount of manufactured devastation. He looked directly into the camera lens and delivered an Oscar-worthy monologue about how deeply he had loved me and how completely I had shattered his trusting heart. He played the ultimate flawless victim. "I just wanted to build a life with her," he said, wiping a single strategic tear from his cheek. "But she demanded equity she did not earn and threatened to ruin my company when I refused to hand over my life's work to her." He then seamlessly pivoted his fake grief into a corporate sales pitch. He begged the tech community to stand by OmniStream Dynamics during these incredibly dark times, urging them to enthusiastically support their upcoming Series A funding round so he could fight back against malicious extortionists like me. The internet devoured his lies instantly. Cancel culture is a ravenous beast that does not care about facts or evidence. It only cares about blood and spectacle. The tidal wave of public outrage crashed down on me almost immediately. My social media feeds became a toxic wasteland of targeted hatred. My personal email inbox was flooded with thousands of vile messages. Complete strangers were sending me highly detailed death threats, telling me to disappear entirely, calling me a gold digger, a parasite, and a fraud. My physical address was leaked online. I had to keep all the window blinds tightly drawn and the lights switched off. The professional damage was even more devastating. A prominent cybersecurity firm I had just signed a lucrative consulting contract with abruptly suspended our agreement. Their human resources director called me sounding deeply apologetic but uncompromisingly firm. "We cannot risk the public relations nightmare right now, Alyssa. We need to pause this contract indefinitely until the dust completely settles." I was completely isolated. The entire world saw me as a villain. The standard response in this chaotic era of digital witch hunts is to frantically fight back. Public relations experts would advise issuing a lengthy legal statement, going on a sympathetic podcast, or releasing a tearful counter video to frantically clear my name. But I chose absolute, impenetrable silence. I deactivated every single one of my public profiles. I did not grant a single media interview. I did not post a single defensive comment. To the aggressive public, my silence looked exactly like guilt. To Brandon and Evelyn, my silence looked like total, unconditional surrender. They severely misread my strategic retreat as a crushing defeat. Their public posts and press releases grew increasingly arrogant. They genuinely believed they had buried me so deep that I would never see the light of day again. They thought they had entirely destroyed my professional credibility, leaving me without a voice, without a career, and without a future. They foolishly forgot one crucial detail. I was the sole architect of their entire digital universe. While they were busy popping vintage champagne and celebrating my demise in the bright spotlight, I quietly retreated into the dark, encrypted corners of the deep web. I opened a highly secure communication channel and reached out to a very specific, fiercely loyal group of former colleagues. They were elite white-hat hackers, brilliant software engineers, who knew exactly how much literal blood and sweat I had poured into OmniStream Dynamics. They had watched Brandon steal the credit for 2 entire years, and they were more than ready to help me burn his stolen kingdom straight to the ground. Late one night, surrounded by the quiet hum of 3 high-powered monitors, I initiated a secure voice conference call with them. "Are we ready to wake up the ghost?" I asked the glowing screen. "Standing by on your exact command, Alyssa." "They have absolutely no idea what is buried inside their back-end framework," one of them replied. Over a year ago, when Brandon first started showing subtle flashes of controlling behavior regarding the legal structure of the company, my developer instincts had warned me to create a secret failsafe. I never actually wanted to use it, but I desperately needed an ironclad guarantee that my intellectual property could never be fully hijacked. I had spent weeks meticulously writing a complex, dormant piece of code and embedding it incredibly deep within the core architecture of OmniStream Dynamics. It was a digital Trojan horse brilliantly disguised as a routine system optimization protocol. It effortlessly bypassed every single security firewall they had because it was built into the very foundational bedrock of the software itself. It was entirely invisible to standard code audits. Brandon and his newly hired team of mediocre engineers genuinely thought they had full control of the internal system. They were currently prepping the software for a massive live public demonstration to secure their $20 million venture capital investment. They were frantically polishing the front-end user interface, making it look beautiful for the television cameras, completely and utterly oblivious to the ticking time bomb resting silently in their root directory. My fingers hovered gently over the mechanical keyboard. I did not need to fight them in the noisy court of public opinion. I did not need to argue with angry strangers on the internet. I just needed to wait for the absolute perfect moment to execute the command. I gave the final green light to my underground team to establish the secure backdoor connection. The digital trap was officially set. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring blankly at the dark terminal screen, finding a deep sense of peace in knowing that Evelyn and Brandon were currently building their majestic golden castle directly on top of my active landmine. Exactly 30 days had passed since the internet declared me legally dead. In the corporate world, a month is more than enough time to rewrite history and bury the truth. Brandon and his mother were hosting their monumental Series A fundraising gala at the most opulent luxury hotel in downtown Austin. The venue was a temple of excess featuring vaulted glass ceilings and a floor polished to such a high gloss that it reflected the massive crystal chandeliers hanging above. This was not just a party, it was a coronation. They had invited the most ruthless venture capitalists, wealthy angel investors, and elite industry journalists to witness the promised launch of what Brandon confidently called a revolutionary breakthrough update to OmniStream Dynamics. The air inside the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the desperate, palpable hunger for profit. Waiters in pristine white gloves circulated with silver platters of caviar and truffles, all paid for by the massive credit lines Brandon had opened against my intellectual property. Every polite smile, every firm handshake, and every clink of a crystal glass was a direct mockery of the countless nights I had spent debugging servers while Brandon slept comfortably. But the burning anger that used to consume my chest was completely gone, replaced by the cold, calculating precision of a digital executioner. Their arrogance was so absolute that simply stealing my life's work was no longer enough for them. They needed to gloat. The morning of the gala, a confused delivery driver had struggled to carry a massive, heavy arrangement of flowers up to my door. It was a traditional funeral wreath. Hundreds of pale, dying white lilies were woven tightly together with a thick, morbid black velvet ribbon. Pinned perfectly to the center of the grotesque display was a handwritten note from Evelyn, along with a gold-foiled all-access VIP pass to the event. The note cheerfully declared that my career was deceased and suggested I come watch the future move on without me. It was a pathetic, highly theatrical attempt to break my spirit and prove their untouchable superiority. They genuinely thought I would sit alone in the dark weeping over dead flowers. Instead, I called my personal stylist. When I arrived at the grand ballroom that evening, I handed the keys of my rented car to the valet and stepped onto the plush red carpet. The room was a predictable sea of monotonous wealth. The men wore sharp navy suits, and the women wore understated, quiet luxury dresses in boring shades of beige and black. I did not wear black to mourn my stolen company. I wore a floor-length custom-tailored silk gown in a shade of brilliant, unapologetic crimson red. It was the exact color of a warning sign, the color of a freshly lit fuse. The moment I stepped through the heavy oak double doors, the atmospheric pressure in the room visibly shifted. Conversations abruptly halted mid-sentence. The clinking of glasses stopped. Heads turned one by one. I walked with my spine perfectly straight, the sharp click of my stilettos echoing clearly over the subtle jazz music playing in the background. I was a ghost crashing their victory lap, and my sheer presence sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Across the vast hall, standing beneath a massive digital banner bearing the company logo I had personally designed, was Brandon. He was practically vibrating with smug self-importance. Wrapped tightly around his arm was Chloe, his brand-new shiny trophy. Chloe was the pampered daughter of one of the most notorious aggressive tech billionaires in the state of Texas. She wore a diamond necklace that cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. More importantly, her father was the lead investor perfectly positioned to inject a staggering $20 million into Brandon's stolen empire before the night was over. Brandon leaned in to whisper something into Chloe's ear, looking like the absolute king of the world, completely and blissfully oblivious to the fact that his entire kingdom was built on a crumbling foundation of stolen code. But Evelyn noticed me immediately. From 50 feet away, I saw the exact second the color rapidly drained from her heavily powdered face. Her champagne flute trembled slightly in her tight grip. I offered her a slow, chilling smile from across the room, then casually turned and walked down the quiet, marble-lined corridor leading to the luxury restrooms. I knew she would follow me. She could not resist the overwhelming urge to assert her dominance. The heavy wooden door of the lounge swung shut behind me, completely sealing out the noise of the party. Evelyn stormed in a second later, her designer heels clicking frantically against the ceramic tile. Her carefully crafted facade of the graceful, wealthy matriarch had completely vanished, replaced by the desperate, vicious control freak I knew all too well. Her eyes darted around the empty room to ensure there were no witnesses before she lunged forward, her voice a harsh, venomous hiss. "What do you think you are doing here, you pathetic little girl?" Evelyn demanded, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "Did you really think putting on a red dress changes anything? I have a dozen armed security guards waiting in the lobby. I will have you physically dragged out of this hotel by your hair and thrown into the street where you belong." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked down at her, maintaining an absolute terrifying calmness that made the thick vein in her forehead throb. I reached out slowly. Evelyn stiffened, bracing herself as if expecting a slap, but I simply smoothed down the wrinkled lapel of her expensive silk jacket. I adjusted her collar with the meticulous, gentle care of an undertaker preparing a body for a closed casket. "I am just here to enjoy the entertainment," I whispered, my voice barely louder than the low hum of the air conditioning unit. "I came to watch your son perform a magic trick, turning absolutely nothing into something, or perhaps vice versa." Evelyn's breath hitched in her throat. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the terrifying reality of my calmness pierced right through her thick armor of arrogance. She opened her mouth to spit another vile threat, but she was suddenly interrupted by the loud, booming sound of the event coordinator calling everyone back into the main presentation hall over the loudspeaker. The technical demonstration was about to begin. The $20 million moment had finally arrived. I patted her tense shoulder gently, stepped carefully around her rigid body, and walked back out into the bright light, completely ready to watch the show. The grand presentation hall was a cavernous theater of modern capitalism, completely transformed to host the most anticipated tech event of the year. I slipped quietly through the heavy velvet-lined acoustic doors, taking my place in the far back corner where the shadows pooled deeply and the security personnel rarely patrolled. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the absolute elite titans of the technology industry. Powerful venture capitalists, angel investors, and renowned software engineers sat in the premium rows. Reporters from major financial television networks had their massive broadcast cameras mounted on heavy tripods down the center aisle, their red recording lights already blinking steadily, ready to stream the event to thousands of viewers. The excited murmurs of anticipation slowly died down to a hushed, reverent silence as the overhead crystal chandeliers and house lights slowly dimmed into complete darkness. A single piercing white spotlight snapped on, illuminating the center of the massive circular stage with blinding clarity. Brandon strode out from the wings. He looked like the quintessential Silicon Valley savior, carefully styled to project an aura of minimalist, effortless genius. He wore a crisp, expensive black turtleneck, dark tailored jeans, and perfectly polished leather shoes. The audience immediately erupted into polite, eager applause. He held up a hand, flashing a brilliant, heavily practiced smile, soaking in the admiration like a sponge absorbing water. He began to speak, his voice artificially amplified by the state-of-the-art surround sound system, echoing with perfect acoustic clarity off the high walls. He paced the stage slowly, gesturing with open, welcoming palms as he launched into his extensively rehearsed monologue. He spoke passionately about his profound vision for the future of digital infrastructure. He spun a magnificent, beautifully fabricated tale about the countless lonely nights he had spent supposedly writing the core algorithms by himself. He described the immense pain of innovation, the heavy burden of solitary genius, and how his groundbreaking architecture would single-handedly revolutionize global data processing. Every single word that fell from his mouth was a meticulously crafted lie stolen directly from the private technical journals I had kept on my nightstand for 2 years. Down in the front row, Chloe and her billionaire father watched him with rapt, unbroken attention. Her father nodded slowly, rubbing his chin, clearly visualizing the massive financial returns on his imminent $20 million investment. Right next to them, Evelyn sat perfectly upright in her designated VIP chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, wearing a smug, triumphant grin. She looked exactly like a proud queen watching her only heir officially ascend to the golden throne. The absolute audacity of their collective delusion was almost artistic in its perfection. Tonight, we do not just talk about the future. Brandon declared, his voice dropping an octave to convey deep historical importance. Tonight, we initiate it. I am thrilled to present to you the live, unprecedented launch of our next generation framework. He turned dramatically toward the back of the stage. On his exact cue, a colossal curved LED screen stretching 40 feet across the back wall flickered to life, displaying the sleek, minimalist loading graphic of Omni Stream Dynamics. A glowing, futuristic acrylic podium rose seamlessly from a hidden trapdoor in the floor, housing a transparent virtual keyboard. The dramatic background music swelled, filling the massive room with a deep cinematic bass that physically vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the expensive champagne glasses on the tables. The final countdown had officially begun. The massive crowd held its collective breath. You could hear a pin drop in that cavernous hall. Time seemed to stretch and distort, pulling incredibly tight like a piano wire about to snap under immense pressure. I leaned back against the cool velvet wall covering. My heart was not racing in panic. It was beating with a slow, steady mechanical rhythm of absolute certainty. I reached into the small black clutch purse I carried and pulled out my smartphone. The screen brightness was turned all the way down to avoid drawing any attention. I bypassed the biometric lock screen and opened the custom encrypted terminal application I had coded specifically for this exact defining second of my life. The interface was completely black, staring back at me, waiting patiently for the trigger. My thumb hovered gently over the digital keypad. I typed a specific command consisting of exactly 12 characters. It was a simple, elegant override sequence. It was the master key to the hidden Trojan horse that had been sleeping quietly inside his stolen servers for over an entire year. Up on the brightly lit stage, Brandon raised his hand high into the air for maximum dramatic effect. He gave the breathless audience one last triumphant, arrogant smile. He brought his palm down hard onto the glowing enter key on his acrylic podium. He fully expected a symphony of dazzling visual effects and a flawless, world-changing demonstration of the software. Instead, he got absolute digital carnage. I pressed enter on my phone at the exact same millisecond. The immediate effect was violently disruptive. The deep cinematic bass echoing through the ballroom abruptly cut off with a horrifying high-pitched electronic screech that made several wealthy investors physically flinch and cover their ears in pain. The sleek, beautiful loading graphic on the 40-foot LED screen violently fractured into a million distorted, glitched pixels. Then the entire local server network suffered a massive, catastrophic failure. Every single monitor, every directional stage light, and every connected device in the room simultaneously blacked out for 2 terrifying seconds of total suffocating darkness. When the power violently surged back, the lighting was no longer a brilliant celebratory white. The massive screen behind Brandon began flashing a blinding, urgent, pulsating crimson red. It bathed the entire ballroom and the shocked faces of the audience in the harsh color of a blaring emergency siren. In the dead center of the giant screen, massive white block letters materialized, dominating the visual space completely. The text read, "Illegal access detected. Core architecture compromised. All proprietary copyrights belong exclusively to Alyssa Delgado." A collective echoing gasp ripped through the room. 400 people stared in complete paralyzed bewilderment at the flashing red warning. The reporters quickly aimed their heavy camera lenses directly at the screen, their camera shutters clicking furiously to capture the disaster. Brandon frantically hammered his fists against the acrylic podium, his face pale with sudden blinding panic. He shouted off stage at the invisible sound engineers, desperately demanding they cut the main power line immediately. But the digital execution was not finished. The Trojan horse had completely locked the administrators out of the primary control systems, overriding every manual switch in the building. The audio system crackled back to life, but it was not the dramatic presentation music. It was a raw, unedited voice recording playing at maximum volume through the premium surround sound speakers of the luxury hotel. Every single syllable was crystal clear. It was Evelyn. $50,000. This is more than you are worth, Alyssa. The voice boomed heavily across the silent, shocked crowd. Evelyn jumped out of her VIP seat, as if she had been electrocuted, her face rapidly draining of all blood. She stared up at the massive speakers in absolute paralyzing horror. The recording continued echoing mercilessly off the high ceilings. Sign the release forms, renounce all claims to the company, and walk away. Consider it a severance package for your little hobby. I built that company, Evelyn. I wrote the code. My own calm voice played back, providing the devastating, undeniable context to the crowd. Then came the final, fatal confession. Evelyn's recorded voice dripped with arrogant malice, completely exposing her true nature to the world.
You were nothing but a pawn, a temporary tool for my son to exploit until he did not need you anymore. Do not be naive, girl. You are in Texas, and you are up against a woman with influence and a son with a platform. Do not even think about taking this to court. You will lose, you will be bankrupt, and you will be labeled a pathetic fraud before you even walk through the courthouse doors.
The entire ballroom erupted into absolute, unmitigated chaos. The stunned silence shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Powerful venture capitalists, the very men who were seconds away from writing massive checks, stood up furiously from their tables. They shoved their chairs back, their faces twisted in deep disgust and outrage at the blatant, undeniable fraud unfolding right before their eyes. They realized instantly that they had been aggressively pitched a stolen product by a pair of highly coordinated con artists. On the stage, the grand illusion of the brilliant tech founder completely disintegrated into dust. Brandon stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish pulled from the water. He looked down at the front row, his eyes pleading desperately for some kind of salvation. Chloe, the billionaire heiress, did not offer him salvation. She stormed up the short flight of stairs onto the stage, her expensive high heels stomping furiously against the hollow wood. She marched directly up to Brandon, her face contorted with pure rage. He weakly reached out a trembling hand to her, stammering her name, desperately trying to formulate a pathetic last-minute excuse. Chloe did not speak a single word. She simply drew her arm back and delivered a brutal, resounding slap directly across his face. The sharp, violent crack of her hand connecting with his cheek echoed loudly through the nearest live microphone, broadcasting the physical humiliation across the entire hall. The sheer force of the blow snapped his head violently to the side and sent him stumbling backward into the acrylic podium. She realized her incredibly wealthy family had almost poured $20 million into a massive illegal grift, and her fury was absolutely radiant. In the back of the room, standing quietly in the protective shadows in my crimson dress, I locked my phone screen. I slipped the device calmly back into my purse. The bomb had successfully detonated, and the ensuing shockwave was truly beautiful to witness. Evelyn completely lost whatever remaining shred of sanity she possessed. She shrieked a primal sound of pure, unadulterated panic and scrambled frantically up the stage steps. She lunged at the acrylic podium, desperately ripping thick black power cables out of the floor sockets with her bare hands, trying to kill the audio feed. But her frantic destruction was entirely useless. My code had completely hijacked the hotel's decentralized network. The recording of her own damning confession looped endlessly, broadcasting her guilt from auxiliary battery-powered systems and emergency backup speakers. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the massive ballroom burst open with deafening force. A heavily armed tactical team from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, flanked by investigators from the Texas Financial Crimes Division, swarmed into the room. Their tactical boots thundered against the polished floor. The lead agent held up a sheaf of legal documents, shouting over the chaos, announcing the immediate emergency arrest warrants for Brandon Vance and Evelyn Vance. The charges were staggering: massive financial fraud, wire fraud, and grand-scale intellectual property theft. Brandon's legs gave out completely. He collapsed onto his knees right there on the illuminated stage. Tears and sweat streamed down his perfectly powdered face. He looked frantically around the room, desperately searching the shadows for me, screaming my name, begging me to stop the nightmare. But I did not lift a single finger. Down on the floor, 2 federal agents forcefully pinned Evelyn's arms behind her back. The sharp click of steel handcuffs echoed over her frantic protests. Her immaculate facade was utterly destroyed. Her expensive foundation smeared her hair a wild, tangled mess. In her absolute rage and despair, she violently turned on the only person left to blame. She screamed vicious curses at Brandon, publicly berating her own son for being a weak, incompetent fool who could not even steal properly. The tide of public opinion violently reversed its course overnight. The very same media outlets and internet mobs that had relentlessly crucified me just weeks prior turned their vicious attention entirely onto the Vance family. The state immediately froze every single one of Brandon's bank accounts, his luxury condominium, his expensive cars, and his entire fraudulent portfolio were seized and liquidated to pay for mounting legal fees and restitution. Before leaving the chaotic ballroom, I calmly approached the lead federal agent. I handed him a small encrypted flash drive containing every single piece of irrefutable hard-coded evidence required to lock them away. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked slowly out the front doors of the hotel. I stepped into the cool, refreshing night air of Texas. The wailing sirens of multiple police cruisers echoed loudly behind me, a fitting soundtrack to the end of their miserable empire. 3 years later, the dust has finally settled. I am no longer hiding in the shadows of Austin. I am sitting in my sunlit corner office overlooking the beautiful skyline of Silicon Valley. Just this morning, my assistant placed the latest issue of Forbes magazine on my desk. My face is on the cover, honored as the Chief Executive Officer of Phoenix Code, a multi-billion-dollar technology empire born directly from the ashes of betrayal. Brandon is currently serving a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary, completely forgotten by the industry he tried to conquer. And Evelyn, the woman who once tossed a $50,000 check at me like garbage, is now working the night shift as a janitor in a commercial warehouse, desperately trying to pay off a mountain of legal debt that she will never escape. Thank you so much to everyone tuning in for listening to my journey today. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let me know in the comments. If you found today's story empowering and entertaining, please consider supporting our channel with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen or by using the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Your support directly pays the hardworking staff who bring these stories to life, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue creating better, more thrilling content for you. Stay strong and never let anyone steal your future.